Kia ora everyone, and thank you, Sarah, for the intro. E te optimal lunch and learn whānau. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. No Scotland, Ireland, England, tai happy o rotorangi o ku tupuna. I tipuaki o ki Kimoreti o Cambridge, Aotearoa. Inarike te motu Araroa, Wahiki Island, taku kainga. Ko Jodine Stodart taku ingoa, ko taku mahi ki Fireside Consulting, B&Z ko te Service Design Director. Kia ora everyone. I also want to say a big ngā mihi nui ki Optimal Workshop. Thank you, Optimal Workshop, and express my gratitude for their contribution to the UX field in New Zealand, Aotearoa, for so many years now. And for always being open to having me participate in their conference events. I've spoken multiple times at UXNZ and I also offered workshops. So I'm very grateful that this has definitely been a significant community for me to be part of over my career here in Aotearoa. Starting from when I first joined Optimal Usability in 2009. So it's been a long relationship. And also a great example of what's called a node for transformational leverage. So I will speak more to that in the talk today, but Optimal is a great example of an organization that's utilized its place in the UX community to have a wider impact than just creating software that supports our research activities. Optimal Workshops UX and Z conferences had a ripple effect. Everyone who has attended and contributed to the conferences and events. So big thanks and shout outs to you all. So the outline for today, I'm just going to go through really quickly. So we're going to talk a little bit about conscious leadership. What am I talking about? We're going to go really quickly through some developmental frameworks and models. One of them, transformational leverage and nodes at a really high level. I'm going to skip over some of these quite complex concepts. Organizational evolution, which is something I talk a lot about, and the 3 lines of work. And then we'll dive into the 6 elements of conscious leadership, what it is and isn't, and hopefully have some time for discussion. So just quickly connecting to me, for those of you that may not have worked with me or met me before. So as I said, I started in New Zealand with Optimal Usability or Optimal Experience, and went from there to working for myself for a while, and then working with Digital Arts Network as a UX director for a number of years. But these days I kind of do a broad bunch of things. So I've sort of branched out into service design now, and I combine some of the practices from regenerative design as well as UX research tools and coaching. So I provide one-on-one coaching to people in UX and design fields. And I also run a yearly UX retreat. So that's an opportunity for practitioners to gather together and connect and have some space to reflect on practice and reflect on some of the things that are affecting our industry. I also run a monthly conversation group called UX Connect for design leaders. And that is monthly online, sort of like a remote meetup. And we mostly have topics that we talk about each month, or sometimes it's just an open discussion and a connect. So I've worked with a number of different clients over the years. Let's just give you a broad brush. So public sector, Auckland Council, Wednesday Police, Auckland Museum, as well as private sector, telcos, insurance, finance. So quite a lot of different environments that I've engaged with. So even though in the past I've worked a lot for small companies who are agencies, sort of 30, 40 people, we've always worked into really large organizations. So what is conscious leadership and why might it be important for design? Any kind of ideas on that? If you have any ideas of the answer to that question, why do you think conscious leadership is important for designers to be aware of? And happy to, if you want to just pop any responses in the chat You can get a bit of a chat going on what you think. Or happy for you to unmute and offer your top of mind thoughts, because this can be something that people already have an awareness of.
I think the design is something that, you know, allows everyone to be involved in a team. So I think as a designer, you have to have a leadership skills, like conscious leadership skills, to let everyone express their design thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. It's a collaborative discipline. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you're
So
always, yeah.
and you have to, as a designer, you have to know how to facilitate it the way that you can get all these ideas out, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, in a way that makes people feel safe so they can share all their ideas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Yep, that's very true. Thank you, Lisa. Anyone else? Any thoughts on why is it important in the design field in particular? There's no right or wrong answer, it's just an exploration. Oh, good. Continuously challenging assumptions. Yes, nice. Love it. Absolutely. And it's natural to our practice to do that, because when we do research, it tells us and it gives us feedback, and it helps us facilitate feedback into our company or our organization or our client who may be operating on assumptions, but until we really get that feedback, we don't know where we're actually at. Being a conscious leader is in part about understanding yours and others' biases and then making decisions that do or don't align with those. Yeah, fantastic point. Love that. To have that awareness of what might be influencing our ways of thinking and doing and our own perspectives and taking those into account. Absolutely. Cool. Well, we'll keep moving. So, I mean, what I believe, why do I talk about this? Why is this important to me? Well, I believe that everything we do, it does have an impact, as humans in general, right? We have a systemic impact on everything we do and touch in our lives. And how might, the question, the problem space that I really was thinking about with, so much going on, so much change going on, as we know, environmentally, economically, on so many multiple levels. How might we have a scalable impact that leads to more, intended rather than unintended outcomes? So, how might we increase human impacts that are consciously beneficial to the systems we are a part of, given that we're always having this impact? How do we make sure it's genuinely a good one? And what I sort of came to believe was that if I support the development of conscious awareness and action as well, both for individuals, through one-on-one coaching or some of the things that I offer, but also for at an organizational level, we can result in a more positive human impact for our planet. And particularly in design as a field, it has an important role to play in because with the tools that we have, we're able to look at predicting, designing for, and delivering intentional impacts. Because design is always about expression of intent and providing also feedback of potential and actual unintended outcomes. So obviously, when we're testing a new product, we're testing out what impact is this product having on this particular group of users, and often we identify the unintended impacts, right? And that could be something big that might affect thousands and thousands of people that use a product every day in their work lives, in multiple places. It might be even something small, but every time we are designing and we are researching, we are contributing to those impacts. So this concept of transformational leverage. Well, okay, before I get into that, I'll just say that that I took the journey of that question, how might we create scalable income and impact, and learning about regenerative design and development, as well as I learned a bit about Robert Kegan's adult development theory and these models of organizational evolution, which I'll speak to. They've all helped me begin that journey of answering that question. Yeah. So transformational leverage. I really love this concept. It gets me so excited because you can look for this concept in the small, in the micro, and in the macro, and this is what you get from looking at things systemically. So in regenerative development design, the practice is to look for these what they call nodes in networks or in ecosystems, and these might be ecological, biological ecosystems. And these nodes, what they are is that they're just kind of like points of exchange of information, materials, resources, and ideas. So they're when several flows come together to exchange at a point. And that's basically how, I see organizations or communities are nodes. They're kind of locations for where many people come together. A lot of human effort, resources, materials, information, ideas come together at one point. And therefore, they can be a site for transformational leverage. So they can have, you could adjust something small in that node and it could have a large impact. So that's why I'm interested in doing this work, both with individuals and with organizations. So just speaking to, zooming out a little bit on this idea of the organization as a node, as a point of transformational impact. In the work of Frederick Laloux's Reinventing Organizations, I'm not sure how many people have come across this quite revolutionary book, okay? So it talks about organizations as stages of human evolution. So how we organize ourselves at different points in time and over history, how we think about ourselves and our world is reflected in how we organize ourselves. And there's lots of different models of how we do that. But what he saw is that he took a developmental model to that, so that there's different stages in our awareness as humans, and that's reflected in the different stages of organization. So here's just one table so that you can understand how this works. So you've got red, which is impulsive, and the metaphor they use to express the red kind of level of organization, sort of wolf pack, top-down authority, strong, clear divisions of labor. Then you have this amber, conformist, army, more formal roles, stable processes over time, maybe less kind of pivoting according to what that key authority person at the top is going to say when everything changes. It's into orange achievement, which is where a lot of our organizations are at today, I believe. Orange based on innovation, meritocracy, accountability, so driven by your individual performance, measured on your performance. The organization operates like a machine. And then reaching into family, green, pluralistic. So there are some organizations today that are reaching into this. And often you'll find like smaller sized organizations. So if you're sort of, around the 30 size, you might find that there's a good sense of family. There's a sense of you can stay connected to 30 people. You can understand who they are and what their values are. And that's a more values driven culture where you empower individuals to affect change, and you're sort of, erring more on self-management rather than a sort of a top-down hierarchy where your performance is measured, in a kind of yearly process. Then reaching into teal, evolutionary. So this is that next step that I believe you can't really achieve unintentionally. So if an organization wants to reach into a teal evolutionary way of organizing itself, it needs to do that intentionally. You need to kind of already understand what are the factors that are involved in creating more of a living organism, self-organizing type of organization. So here's another view to look at how they sort of see it. Over time, you've got, red, powerful chiefdoms, this is historically, and then into more formal hierarchies of command and control, into that more mechanistic orange, and then into green, where the relationships above outcomes. So having an organization that seeks to develop the individuals a little bit more, and values the relationships over, like, you're a cog in the machine and you will produce these outcomes for the wider organization. And here's another, just kind of another table to help you just kind of engage with these concepts. They're quite big, but the reason why I introduce them is that they're just so mind-blowing, like once we can kind of zoom out and see, where our organization might be in these. And what I do see is that some have elements of these different levels. So you're never completely in one or another. You might find that mostly it's an orange, but you have some kind of symptoms of green. You might even have some symptoms, to be honest, of red. If you have a really strong, authority figure who's really driving the organization, and who might pivot on a whim and say, what I do or don't like, and everyone changes according to, you might be operating more on that red level. So all of these are possible, but this is sort of lays it out more in a historical context. So ultimately, teal is seen as a little bit more organic. So it's not so hierarchical, machine-like. It's more constantly evolving, agile. You've got to really trust your self-managing teams, that they can make more locally based decisions at the level, rather than it being top-down hierarchical decisions. And it does mean that you yourself need to be more sort of self-managing, and more self-leadership is required in these environments. So a higher level of awareness and conscious leadership is required in these environments to understand how to operate at a teal level, rather than I just come, I do my job, I get told, I get told what my outcomes are, I get told how to do the process. You need to be a lot more innovative. So here's just a moment to reflect on where you might see your organization. I'm just making a note of that yourself. Cool. We'll move on to now the 3 lines of work and nested systems. So again, this is based on this regenerative development design and Carol Sanford's really amazing books around applying regeneration to business as well. Oh yeah, thanks for sharing that reference, Sarah. So the references are there. I can definitely share the deck. Absolutely. So the philosophy around the 3 lines of work is the idea that if we're going to be more regenerative, if we're going to help, the systems that we're a part of become more whole, we start with ourselves, and we start with work on ourselves. It calls upon each of us to observe carefully, to think ecologically, design systematically, engage gratefully, and act humbly. To do so, we need to evolve our own capacity and the capacity of our communities to serve what's called the larger whole, the wider system that we're contained within, in which we're nested. And then she talks to concentrating nodal efforts. So that's that reference to what are the nodes that we're a part of? You know, even in our own personal lives, we might be involved in nodes in our own communities, right? That are also, you know, schools are amazingly effective nodes across New Zealand, for example. And concentrating that effort where they may have the greatest systemic impact for the least effort. So that's that idea of leverage. So a small amount of effort can result in a large change. So this is the model of the 3 lines of work that we can apply as designers. So this talks to the work of the designer, and when they're talking about a regenerative designer that might be working, you know, urban regeneration project or something. But for us, we're talking about, you know, we might be creating digital products and services, which, as we're learning, have a huge scalable impact on our planet now. So when we look at things like Uber and how that's transformed the way we do transport now, and there's now a lot of other options. We look at Airbnb, like we know about disruption now and how much it can have a huge impact on people's lives across the globe. So starting with the self, again, so the work of the designer themselves is to change themselves before, you know, and as they also think about growing the capability of your team, your community, your organization, your company. So that's the work of the design process. So as you engage with the design process, there are ways that you can build capability, and you could see that even with research, obviously, when we produce insights and how much that changes the way a team and an organization sees itself. And then ultimately feeds into the work of the output, the outcome, which is the design product or service, which can have that third line of impact on the health and value of the system. So the design of the product continues to act on the world. So once you release something, it's out there. It's doing its thing in the world. And so ideally, we've embedded in it, in the design of that product or service, some holistic thinking and some intentional thinking about how it might impact others. Then you have the design of the process. So by doing that intentionally, shapes the consciousness, the capabilities and aspirations embedded in the product, and then down to the designer themselves. Any questions about this framework so far? Is it making sense? So one thing I often say that I took away that was a really big moment for me is thinking about how focused we are on both products and projects. So often, you know, we're on a project to produce a product. And a project is basically, it's kind of a container that harnesses all that energy and effort and thinking and ideas. And it's really a project in service to the outcome of producing the product or service. But the project itself can also be in service of other outcomes. How might it, you know, support our team to develop? You know, how might it, you know, increase the capability of my team to lead themselves or to learn a new research or design technique? Like every time we engage in a project, it's actually an opportunity to increase the capability of the greater whole. So that's one concept that I kind of keep as a nutshell of this framework is, you know, how might, you know, what I do and what my project or my team does be in service to the greater whole that we're a part of. This is just another diagram from Carol Sanford. So it just shows, you know, again, in that kind of ecosystem model, yourself at the center, affecting the organization, and then affecting the greater whole. So an even greater whole outside your organization, like where is your organization placed? Like at the moment, I'm at BNZ, that's an organization of 5,000 people that's spread across many locations across New Zealand. And so when I think about the impact it has on New Zealand as a whole, that's quite massive. So a lot of this thinking and that conscious awareness of, you know, the systems that I'm a part of and how they in turn have that ripple effect out. So ideally, a conscious design leader engages in all 3 lines of work, seeking to understand, develop, and integrate them, making them more conscious and bringing them into alignment. Actually, before we go to that, so I would love to hear from the group now about what perhaps a conscious design leader isn't. What would be some examples of where you think you wouldn't be acting, behaving, being like a conscious design leader?
A designer who is not aware of the company structure and the stakeholders that are part of the team.
Yeah, amazing. Great.
I mean,
So
like,
having, yeah,
you have to be aware of what's the company structure and what's your team is capable of. You have to well understand them first. If you don't, you're not a leader.
yeah, great. And so how might you go about understanding that? You know, what is the structure and what are the team's capabilities? Any ideas? I mean, there's lots of tools. So, you know, we can do stakeholder interviews, we can do stakeholder mapping,
Oh yeah.
just to and just to zoom out and start to see, you know, who's where. And sometimes when we do stakeholder mapping, there might be the organizational structure, but when you actually look at the relationships, if you know and you're aware of them, sometimes there are people within the organization, they may not have that level of authority, but they have a lot of influence. So sometimes looking beyond the structure, even the structure has that formal authority and influence. There's certain people within the organization, if you can get their ear and, you know, understand how they operate, they can be those kind of points of leverage again, right? Anna says, making presumptions about others without understanding them. I love it. Yes, Anna, and that's really great. So how might we seek to understand them? How might we seek to bust our assumptions about who people are or what their role is or how they see their role or their place within the team or the organization?
The two that came to mind for me, the first one is that really like narrow view of what you're delivering on. So that real sort of blinkered view of like, we must do this without any consideration of the wider impact. And I think it can be tricky for people, especially in a large organization, to sort of see that wider impact. Everyone's just going after what they're going for. And then the other thing would be, I guess, kind of profit over people and not considering the impact on people.
Yeah, beautiful. I love both those points. So, you know, being narrow in your view and your thinking. And, you know, that's something I want to dig into here. So, I think that's, you know, we're all working in high pressure, high fast paced environments because there's a lot of pressure on design to deliver in increasingly kind of leaner ways, right? And so when we go into that mode of pressure, what happens is we naturally narrow, and that's how our brains work. So, you know, if we look at our neural networks, when we're in the analytical network of our brain, that's an analytical, narrow, focused, you know, we've got to get this out the door. We're focused on this one thing. And it's useful. It's useful for executing fast and getting things done. But it's not so useful for zooming out and seeing that bigger picture, right? Like as Scott says, not so deep in the details. They lose sight of the bigger picture. And also you can, if you're rushing, neglect people because you're trying to, and we all do this. I do this, you know, like I notice when am I unconscious and what I'm doing? It's when I'm rushing, you know, it's when I'm making really quick reactive decisions or responding, just trying to get the thing out the door, you know. And those are always times where I think, okay, how might I, you know, just pause? How can I hit pause, you know, just for a moment? Great, some other responses here. So Rachel's saying, this is a tricky one to balance, yeah, when it comes to creating focus for a team in a complex environment. Absolutely. That's where the role of the leader becomes so critical. To shelter the team from the distractions, but be aware of the bigger picture so you can shape the project and balance the risk. Yeah, beautiful point, Rachel. That's so true. yeah, so help the team execute while also holding that bigger picture yourself and holding that other view that you have as a leader, because you get exposed to what else is going on, but it might be too much for them because they've got to narrow in sometimes and just focus on delivery. But there, you know, it's like that kind of convergence, divergence in a way too, because sometimes you might want to, after your team's delivered, zoom out again with the team and say, hey, look at what you've done, look at the impact it's had, here's some other things to be aware of that are going on within the organization, so you can feed that into your perspective. These are all really great things. Cool. So I've just made some notes as well, and then we've covered off on a number of these points. So what conscious design leadership isn't, and it's not like being bad or anything, it's just like, this is just how we are as humans, and, you know, so narrow awareness, not thinking about impacts behind the short term, and self-advancement as well. So sometimes we can be very individualistic and, you know, career driven. I've just got to get to that next level, just got to get my pay rise or whatever, you know? And that's fine, and that's important to your own career development. But I often think, you know, my philosophy anyway is that if you help everyone, you naturally get sort of pulled up and you naturally get rewarded. So telling and talking more than listening is another really important one. Not being open to feedback. So as leaders, sometimes we can get to such a level of seniority that we can't get good feedback because everyone's just wanting to please us, or, you know, or we might not be so open to hearing what we could be improving on, because we feel like we have to hold this kind of illusion of I'm perfect now because I'm at this level or whatever. and it's just so not the case. And that's where we stop growing and learning. Reacting rather than responding. So as I mentioned, you know, we can all do that. Where things don't go right or don't go our own way, and we might just go, oh, you know, and be flippant and for a moment because we're under pressure. And that other column, really crucial to mention this, getting overworked and trying to serve from an empty cup. So as leaders, I can see that, you know, in leaders that they look physically worn out and they continue working while they're sick. And, you know, because they put the team and the product or service that they're working on ahead of their own well-being. And, you know, we probably all do this sometimes, but what it means is we're actually not serving our team that well because we're not nourished ourselves, right? So also not allocating that reflection time to see the bigger picture. You will never find the time. You have to allocate the time. If you don't allocate the time, you do get disconnected from yourself, your own values, and your own purpose of why you're doing the things that you're doing. And you can operate this way. Don't get me wrong. You can absolutely operate this way all the time. It just, if you're wanting to, you know, make greater change, it does require some different behavior. So what I'll just touch on here, and this is part of a conscious leadership program that I'm doing. It's a 10-week program kicking off in early October. We will go into each of these elements of conscious leadership more deeply, and we'll go into all those frameworks that we talked about more deeply with exercises and share backs and things. So the first one is know where you are. So it starts with self. Again, like the 3 lines of work, know where you're going. So orientating to your values, your purpose, your mission. The practice of deep listening and being curious. How do we do that? And how do we include that in the way that we gain influence as well on our other stakeholders? Being open to feedback. So learning about different feedback models and how we use those always on feedback to be continuously kind of improving ourselves and our team. Looking after yourself and keep practicing and learning. So again, this is similar to our design process model, right? Is that we want to keep testing and learning, you know, how are we going, you know, and we need those feedback loops to keep practicing, because it's not a one and done situation if we want to keep evolving.